west side. Outside of what looks like the city, just middle of the city. I get city right on the lake. It's just beautiful. No. I actually live on the shore right near the lake. You know me better than that. I see my neighbors up there working on them while I'm just sitting there enjoying things. I don't know. I have a kayak. It's way out of the tree. Good day, and the moment. No, honestly, we just live in all this. Just wait till we go.
So did everyone have a chance to get some wonderful dessert? Some coffee, some water? Thank you. This is for you guys. This is your thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh, there's more too. Good. So really, we'd like to turn it over to another feast of storytelling time.
Thank you, Abby. Welcome, everybody. We're glad you're here for the fourth not annual storytelling event. This is the fourth time we've done this in the space of either 5 or 6 years. I forget which. Mark Wilson, over here, was our very first storyteller, I think, at this event, whatever year that was. And he's on again tonight. We've got some great storytellers here. We've got some storytellers I've just met for the first time tonight. And we've got some storytellers who are on my list that I haven't even met yet. If you're here, raise your hand. I thought so. Oh, there they are. Okay. So, I'm going to call you eventually. Your turn. Now, this is a real storytelling contest with an actual prize at the end. And yous, and only yous, are going to be the judges of this very, very legitimate storytelling contest. When the storytelling is all over, we will part.
There's a prize?
Yes, there's a prize. An actual real prize. Are you surprised? There's 2 surprises? Well, let's get together. Maybe we'll have a first place and a second place.
Wow, yes.
Or a first place and a last place. That never happens. Why don't they ever do that? Why don't they say, hey, why doesn't America Have Talent have the one that said, you were the very worst act we ever had on this stage. You get a prize. So, anyhow, we're going to begin tonight with the story. And the stories are supposed to be limited to 7 minutes. So, which is, as you know, about 1/5 of a sermon. So you should be able to sit still for it. So, our very first story tonight is Phyllis Blackstone. Phyllis, are you ready? Come on up. Phyllis is a storyteller from Bath, Maine, who was recommended for this, and I decided she'd go first. So, you can use a microphone, handheld, or spoken, whichever you like. Now, get out of your way.
Good evening. Thank you so much for including me in your program tonight. On that hot summer day in the early 80s, I picked up my music folder and proceeded to the Winslow Congregational Church, where I served as the organist. It was summertime. The schedule was abbreviated. No choir anthems, no special editions, a generic bulletin that we used for the entire summer. I got to the church and arranged my music on the organ. First, I placed the postlude, then all of the other pieces of music up to the front, which held the prelude. The guest minister that Sunday came in and arranged his notes on the podium and took his seat in the big pulpit chair. Everything was ready. Easy peasy. What could go wrong? Climate change. That's what went wrong that day, because during that service there was changing moods and feelings between the minister and the organist. I played the prelude. He got up and welcomed everyone and announced the first hymn. At the end of the first hymn, I waited for the prayer of confession. He announced the responsive reading. What? What's going on? The climate was a bit chilly. Then I started to play the next hymn, and he read the Old Testament reading. The climate was icy. I waited for him to read the New Testament reading, and he glared at me and kept pointing to the hymn book, and finally stood up and announced another hymn. The climate was heating up. After that, I waited for the intercessory prayer, and he announced the offering. I looked to the congregation. The ushers looked confused as well. They jumped up and scurried to the back and picked up the offering plates and started to take the offering. The offertory, my music was now out of order. I flipped through the pages to find the offertory, and when I found it, the nervous hands dropped it, and I watched it float down past the organ under the foot pedal. I grabbed a nearby hymn book. I opened it and played the first thing I saw. A bad old hymn book. He began the sermon. I collected myself. I decided that this service was now in crisis mode. I needed to do something. I determined that as soon as he finished his sermon, I would begin the final hymn. I know he was the minister, but this was a crisis. And after all, I was in charge of an instrument that had a volume pedal. The sermon ended. We sang the final hymn. He gave the benediction, and everyone seemed very relieved. The whole service was over. After all the parishioners had been greeted and left, and I closed up the organ, the minister and I were alone. We smiled at each other, a tepid type of smile, and shook hands. He picked up his notebook, and on the top of the notebook I noticed the generic bulletin from last year. No wonder He was using one bulletin, and I was using another one. We had a good laugh about it. But the lesson is clear, isn't it? Churches have to work together despite their changing moods and feelings. For how will the big problems, the real problems of like climate change, ever get solved unless we are all on the same page?
Easy, like, I think anytime you get to the end of the service within 5 minutes of each other, that's an accomplishment. A lot of things can go wrong. A lot of things do go wrong. So, all right, our next storyteller is Mark Wilson, who is going to tell us the story of Mrs. Pickles' Jubilee. Mark, welcome.
Thank you. Mr.
Mr. Oh, excuse me. Of course it's
I'm going to use this one.
All right.
All right. We on?
You are.
Good?
Yep.
Good. Okay. For those of you who know what I'm about to do, you'll know what to say when I say a story, a story.
Let it come, let it go.
Yes. The name of this story is Mr. Pickles' Jubilee. Don Murray, Jr. owned 2 cats, a male named Mr. Pickles and a female named Jubilee. Now, Don had suffered a stroke. He was disabled and living on Social Security disability income. Money was tight. And so when Mary got up in worship that morning to announce that she was part of a group that spayed or neutered your cat for free, Don took notice. Because the one thing that Don and Mary had in common, besides their faith, was their love for cats. A word about Mary. Mary possessed one of those oversized personalities that was fed by an energy that knew no limits. If you were in the same frame of mind as Mary, she came across as lively and gregarious and animated and fun. If you were in a different frame of mind than Mary, you found her absolutely exhausting. She was one of those folks that would come up to a child after worship and go, "Now aren't you a cute little..." Never saw the kid again. If you received a card in the mail from Mary, and chances are you did, there were doodles all over the front of the envelope and colored pictures on the inside, and if you were close, you got the confetti treatment. Mary wrote emails where every letter was a different color and a different font. Do you know how much energy it takes to write one word in an email, even in a different color, but to write every letter a different color and a different font? That took skill. That's Mary. Mary had skill like that. Back to our story. After worship, Don and Mary connected around the free spay-neuter clinic, and on the appointed day, Mary stopped by Don's apartment in Bath to pick up the cat. Don wasn't around, so Mary scooped up the cat, which is a much more dangerous process than that simple phrase made it out to be. And she headed for Yarmouth, where the operation was to take place. About 15 minutes later, I received a call from Don. Because of his stroke and because of my hearing loss, it was often hard for me to understand Don, even under the best of circumstances. But when he got agitated, he tended to slur his speech a little more than usual. "You got the wrong kid," Don said. I said, "What?" "You got the wrong kid." Don tried again. I said, "Slow down, Don, slow down. Take a breath. Take your time. Deep breath." I could hear him go, "She got the wrong cat." It turned out that Don had neglected to tell Mary that he had 2 cats. Arriving in his apartment, she saw a cat and thought reasonably enough that it was the right one. It was the one that needed to be spayed or neutered. It wasn't. It wasn't the right cat. So she had scooped up Jubilee, the female, to be spayed when it was actually Mr. Pickles, the male, who was scheduled to be neutered. Okay, Don, I said, I'll call Mary. Yeah, and by the way, Mark, he said, those vets are going to be in for a surprise. I said, what do you mean, Don? He said, Jubilee's already been spayed. Not only had Mary taken the wrong cat, she had taken a female cat which had already been spayed. And of course, by now the fur had grown back over the scar, and there'd be no way of knowing that poor Jubilee had already been spayed until they opened up the poor creature again. So I took a deep breath, and I called Mary on her cell phone. Hi, Mary. It's Mark. Don said you came for his cat. Yes, she said. I said, where are you? I asked gingerly. In Freeport on the highway. Oh, phew, I answered. There's still time. Time for what? This is a little awkward, Mary, but Don didn't tell you he had 2 cats. You took a female, yes. So actually it was a male that he had that needed to be neutered. You got the wrong cat, Mary, and Jubilee, the female, the one you took, has actually already been spayed. The next sound I heard was an expletive, and it was a colorful one, befitting the talents of a woman who wrote emails with different words and different fonts. The next sound I heard after that was a cell phone being dropped on the floor, and the third sound I heard was the sound of Mary's brakes locking up at 65 miles an hour on the highway. As I found out later, Mary was indeed in Freeport, but she was on her way home. She had already dropped off Jubilee in Yarmouth at the vet's office. When she found out that she had brought the wrong cat to the clinic, a female who had already been spayed instead of the male that needed to be neutered, she slammed on the brakes and turned around in one of those authorized vehicle only places on the interstate, and she had sped back to Yarmouth. She pulled into the vet's office, put the car in park, left the engine running, left the car door open, ran into the vet's office, ran past the receptionist with the open jaw, searching the exam rooms until she found the room where the vet was in a little white sheet over Jubilee, who was just then preparing to go under the knife, no doubt thinking somewhere in her little kitty brain, sheesh, I thought I'd already done this. Put down that knife, said Mary, and all of her words conveying all the different colors and all the different fonts at the same time. The vet, not used to being intruded upon in her own exam room, and thus in her confused state, complied immediately, giving Mary time to blurt out the whole story of how she'd taken the wrong cat, and how the poor cat there on the table under the white sheet had already been spayed. Jubilee was now saved, and she was allowed to leave with Mary, albeit one would think from her perspective, reluctantly. Mary returned Jubilee safely back to Dawn with some strong words and no small amount of laughter, and a can of tuna fish for Jubilee for all that she had suffered, and all was well. And so one might say that Jubilee lived up to her name that day, being spared her second spaying. But one might also say that it was Mr. Pickles' Jubilee as well.
Oh, there's nothing like a good punchline, is there? Mr. Dorhauer, you are next. I decided I would give you the unenviable assignment of following our esteemed president, share a story.
So this is also a hot summer day story. But hot summer day in southern Arizona is a little different than a hot summer day in northern Maine. Temperature was about 112 degrees. And I was in a rental car driving from Phoenix to El Paso, Texas. My first trip as the conference minister of the Southwest Conference to the great city of El Paso. And I'm one of these guys who likes the windows down on the highway and the radio up. And I'm tooling down Highway 10, right at the Arizona-New Mexico border with the music about as loud as it can get, when all of a sudden the car dies. And I pull over to the side of the road just as I noticed that the gas gauge was well below E. I got out of the car and thought, I don't remember a gas station very close behind me, so I'm just going to start walking down the highway in my sandals at 112-degree heat. And every plant in Arizona has a barb or a thorn or and so my ankles and my feet are getting scratched up. And after about 40 minutes of this and nothing in sight, I think I better flag somebody down because I'm dehydrating fast. My legs and ankles are getting torn up and I don't see anything. So I move from the highway over the barbed wire fence to the outer road. And not long after I make it to the outer road, an old beat-up pickup truck stops. Now this is a story about assumptions. I'm in southern Arizona, close to the Arizona-New Mexico border, and a pickup truck stops. And the guy says, "What's up?" And I tell him I've run out of gas. And I say, "I'm walking to the nearest gas station." He says, "Well, it's 35 miles that way. Why don't you hop in?" I go around to the passenger side and open the door. And before I hop in, I have to remove 2 long-arm rifles from the passenger side. Now, I made an assumption when the old guy pulled over to beat up pickup truck. My assumption was confirmed when I opened the door and saw 2 long-arm rifles, which I did move out of the way, only now to be staring at a holstered pistol with about 35 bullets in the leather holster. And it was at that point that I looked over at the driver and saw that in his right hand was a half-drinking can of beer. While on the dashboard in front of him was its replacement when that one went dry. The last thing I wanted in that moment was to climb into that guy's pickup truck and be under his control, but what choice did I have? So I climbed in. We go about a mile down the highway, and he pulls off of the highway onto the outer road saying, "I've got a better idea than just taking you to the nearest gas station. How about I just take you to my house?" And I mean, we're in the middle of nowhere, southern Arizona, and we turned onto the outer road and off onto a dirt road, and I can see nothing anywhere on the horizon. We drive for a few miles when we pull up to a house by itself in the middle of nowhere. And in my head, I'm thinking there are going to be 2 guys playing the banjo on the front porch. We pull into the driveway and he says, "I haven't been completely honest with you. This isn't my house." Oh my God. He says, "It's my ex-wife's house." He gets out of the car and knocks on the door. I don't hear anything, and he opens the door, and that's when I heard something. The moment she recognized him, she strung out a string of expletives that you could hear all the way out in the driveway where I was in the pickup truck. And the next thing I could hear was some piece of ceramic or glass crashing against the wall as he came running out the front door and disappeared behind the house. And now she's out on the front porch screaming and pays no attention to me. She's just screaming at him. And I wait, and I wait, and I wait, and he comes back 3 or 4 minutes later with, lo and behold, a 5-gallon tank of gas, which he quietly places in the back of the pickup truck, gets in the car, and drives me all the way back to where my car was abandoned on the highway. Calmly gets out, pours the gas into the tank, at which point, as he finishes up, puts the cap back on it, I pull out my wallet and I hand him a $20 bill. And he says to me, "No thanks, you just help the next person down the road." And that taught me about making assumptions.
I'd just like to say 2 things. First of all, welcome to Maine. We have guns, but it's not 112 outside. And second of all, you need to read a book by a Mainer. Have you read Desperation by Stephen King? Well, now's the time to read it, having already had that experience. Who's read it? Yeah, a few of you. Okay. All right. Next on my list, I think Abby. I think it's you. Abby, are you here? Yes. Abby Lynn is going to talk to us.
This was the second time.
Oh, that might be the first prize.
So a few years ago, I needed to have some medical tests. And any of you who've had to do the cancer journey and your body starts to give you signals, I don't know, your anxiety starts to go up. So I had to go and do one of these tests. And the technician who met me was, you know, a man, and there was another woman in there, and we went through the test, and he was trying to make me feel comfortable, and I wasn't feeling comfortable or chatty. And he asked me at that point, "Well, what do you do?" So I'm usually kind of reluctant. I don't really like to tell people what I do because they're either, well, you just get a whole bunch of assumptions that can get really strange. But apparently I was in the mood, so I said, "I'm a pastor." It went dead silent. And he finished the rest of the test, and I was thinking, okay, just finish this up. And he left the room and said, "Okay, well, you can get back in your clothes." You know, I was in the Johnny and whatnot, and I'll be back. And so he comes back into the room and leaves the door open. And he comes over, "Well, I'll get the test over to your doctor," and la-di-da-di-da. And he looks right at me and he says, "Can I tell you something?" I'm like, "Okay." And then he was very deliberate. He sat down so that he was in a lower position. He wasn't trying to be threatening or whatnot. And the door was staying open. Okay, I can listen to this. He says, "I have to tell you a story. When I was a little boy, I grew up in Canada. And in Canada, my father had left. I'd never even known him. And my mother raised me and my brother for as long as she could, until she left. And we don't know where she went. But we had a grandmother in Maine. And we'd gone to their house for a couple of summers, so we went to go live with my grandmother. And that was okay. But it was hard to be here, because I didn't know English. My brother and I didn't know English. And as he told the story, this beautiful French-Canadian accent started spilling out as he told it and got more familiar with it. So he said, growing up, you know, in Maine, it was really lonely and it was really hard. But I had friends. I made friends, and my grandmother, she brought us to church every Sunday. And it was a Catholic church. And I prayed to God, and God was a part of my life, but I became a young man, and I did some things. And I didn't need God as a part of my life anymore. So I didn't talk to God. And I went away to college, and I became a technician. I met this beautiful woman. She's my wife, and I love her. And we have a son. First son. And I love him so much, my heart breaks. And this brings up all sorts of other things within my life, like, why did my dad not stick around? And how can I love this little being so much? And all that grief and that anger just started to well up and well up. And he said, one night, I had to let it out. And I went out the front door, and there was a starry night sky, and I let it all out. All the tears, all the rage, all the anger, all the loneliness, I poured it out. And God heard it all, and God and I started talking again. I went to bed that night. He said, I was exhausted. He said, but the dream I had, the dream In my dream, there was this beautiful, beautiful bright blue sky. And there was this dove coming out of the sky. And these arms came around to hold me. And they held me. And they held me and held me. And I woke up feeling this love. And it was so clear in my mind. And I knew God was with me. God was with me the whole entire time. This changed my life, but I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't know what to do with it. I went to work. I went home. So one day, I was supposed to be at work. He said, I've never been late to work. I've never missed a day in work. But I had to stop by the church. I stopped by the church, and there's the priest. They were just finishing a funeral. And I waited, and I talked, Father, can I tell you a story? I need to talk to you. And the priest said, yes, just a minute. So they said goodbye and all the rest of that, finished up. They said, you know, what do you need to tell me? I said, Father, I've had this dream. I've had this conversation. In this dream, there's this beautiful blue sky. And he described all that feeling of these arms coming out just to hold him and rock him. And the priest didn't say anything. He just nodded. And then after a while, he said, you need to come with me. You need to come with me right now. And so he followed the priest over to the parsonage. The priest said, wait right here. And the priest went up the stairs and came down with this 8.5 by 11 frame in his hand. And at that point, the technician got up, and I didn't even see it. There was a satchel on the counter, and he went and pulled out from his satchel this 8.5 by 11 frame. And he said, the priest gave me this. And it was a picture, beautiful, bright blue, with a dove in the sky, and 2 arms reaching out. And the priest told him, you have to have this. This is yours. And so this technician said to me, every once in a while, I wake up and I know I have to share that story with someone. And I saw you, and I knew I had to share that story with you. And God is always with you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Abby. Great. Also, let's do this. You've been sitting a long time. Just stand up. If you can stand up where you are, if you can't, no. And just get yourself a stretch. We have a few more stories, and there's good ones coming. I want you to be able to hear them. All of our storytellers have been doing great. They've been hundreds of times. So, okay, if you're stretched just now, turn to the person beside you, pat them on the back, tell them they're just great. Then turn to the person on the other side. Turn to the person on the other side, shake your finger and say, you could do better. And then you can be seated.
Oh, thank you. I love that. I love that.
Well, the kitchen staff would like to know if they could have 5 minutes to clear everything out, and then we will continue. Will that be all right? Good. Yeah, very good. Why don't you do that?
you.
to work here. There are many ordained organic farmers in Maine, and one of them is here with us tonight. And Holly is going to come and share a story called Taking Care of the Little Ones.
Wasn't exactly the most romantic getaway. The reason that my beloved had come to stay with me in Denver, Colorado, in the midst of my seminary career, was because the sheriff in her town said, "You should probably leave for a few days." My wife, now, was for several years the chair of the Board of Selectmen in Powell, Maine. And when you're the chair of the Board of Selectmen, well, nobody actually knew what to call her because she wasn't a select man. Some people suggested she should just be called the Queen, which I thought was a good choice, but my opinion didn't matter much locally. As chair of the board, she was charged with enforcing the law and doing the business of the town, which included delivering the notice to people who hadn't paid their taxes for a really long time that the town had put a lien on their property. And so, charged with this task, this official duty, she had gone down the road to a fellow who lived almost a stone's throw from her, and she had delivered the paperwork to the family compound, where it was known that there was an arsenal stored. And then the sheriff had told her that she probably ought to leave town for a few days. So we didn't have a lovely little romantic getaway in Denver, Colorado. I was still in the midst of my studies. We did take a couple of little road trips, but most of the time I had a traumatized, terrified, altitude-sick woman on my hands. She's a bagpiper, and it really upset her that she couldn't find enough air in her lungs to play her pipes. We measure these things differently. Well, eventually things kind of settled down at the Anderson compound down the road, and after Mr. Anderson's son had shot the windows out of her Jeep. And eventually they kind of worked things out and arranged a payment plan, and a couple of years went by. I finished seminary, I moved to Maine, and we started a farm. And we were both united in our passion, not for each other so much as our passion to steward that land. That was the thing that drew us together. That was the thing that kept us together. That was the thing that inspired the incredibly hard and poverty-stricken labor of trying to bring land back that had been topsoil mined. Sometime in the 50s, the family that had farmed that land got behind on their bills, and I guess they still paid their taxes, unlike the Andersons, but they sold the topsoil, which was a common practice in southern Maine in those days, to make the payments. And so we had a farm with no topsoil. Well, my wife had read these books and seen these films and heard these discussions about how all the bees were dying. And we knew that it would be years before we saw any return from trying to build soil. We only had so many cows and we only had so much grass and hay to feed them, and they just weren't accumulating fertilizer at a very high rate, especially when they're grazing and not spending all their time in a barn. It didn't really build up. It just kind of melted back into the soil as we'd hoped, but with not much to show for it. So we kept working hard. We kept trying to build the soil, and we decided that keeping bees was something that we could do. Even though we didn't have the best soil for flowers, we knew that bees travel. We knew that the typical bee has about a 2-mile flight range, and we thought, well, our soil might not be good, but we have a lot of people around us who are doing a little better than we are, and they have beautiful gardens. And we also knew that a lot of them were involved in organic gardening, and so we knew that the neighborhood was probably safe. So Sue started keeping bees. And for the first couple of years, she tried all the alternative methods that were supposed to help the bees feel more like their own natural choices of what a bee would like, and they died every winter. She tried the Perone hive invented in South America. She tried the Waré hive invented by an English clergyman. I really hoped that one would work. Well, it just wasn't working out. She said, I'm so sick of keeping annual bees. I want perennial bees. Well, she had this sad little hive out in the front yard, and one day George Anderson drove up in a truck that, my God, I have no idea how it even held together. You couldn't see even any duct tape or baling twine or anything. I think it was just held together by pure cussedness. He drove up in this thing, and he said, Sue Mac, I hear you're keeping bees. She said, yeah, she was. She was trying anyway. Hadn't had too much success, though, but she was trying. And he said, well, Sue Mac, we got to keep them little critters alive. Now this is the same man who refused to pay taxes to the town for year after year, who we could hear shooting off guns when it definitely wasn't hunting season, and sometimes we heard arguments that echoed up across to our road, and we feared for the life of other people in his compound. And here was George Anderson, with the present of a Langstroth hive. He said, Sue Mac, I brought this for you because we got to keep them little critters alive. And for the next 2 years, he stopped by almost every day during beekeeping season. And at the end of the season, he brought his son, probably the one that shot the windows out of the Jeep, to help wrap up the hives to get them ready for winter. Well, we keep perennial bees now. We've tried out a few different methods. Now we're trying the Slovenian hive, where it's basically a bee condominium, and they all kind of snuggle in together and insulate themselves, and eventually when you get critical mass, they say they'll insulate the whole building themselves, and you never even have to use electricity or anything to keep it warm all year round, because the bees, they do their own air conditioning. So we're pretty excited about that, but we owe it all to the father of a guy who shot the windows out of my wife's Jeep, who somehow has become the best neighbor anyone could hope for. And like a few other people tonight, I want to encourage you to pay attention to the unlikely allies, because we got to keep them little critters alive.
So we have a couple of special guests tonight, and they're going to come and tell their stories together. Well, not together, but one after the other. Oops, I lost my list here. Hang on, I think we're in there. Oh, that's the wrong page. And so is that. That's the right one. Just got to open up. Life is so much easier now that we have these devices. Here it comes. There it is. So, Lindley Kinnerk is going to talk about discipline in a foreign land.
I think I'll use this little thing. Does it work?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. I'm trying to see if there's something I shouldn't touch. Okay. So I'm Lindley. Andy and I went to Zimbabwe a few years ago as missionaries. I'm a teacher and Andy is a minister. So we knew right away there were going to be some cultural differences that we were going to have to get used to. One of the most shocking ones initially was that I had to wear a skirt every single day. But I did. We eat with our hands, not fingers, mind you, with the whole hand. I was a little puzzled because the boys and the girls in Zimbabwe all wear their hair exactly the same, very, 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 very short. And they all have the same school uniform from the waist up. So in my classroom of 50 children, 40 is the minimum, legally minimum, of 50 children, I couldn't tell who was who, and I couldn't even tell if it was a boy or a girl unless I looked down to see if they were wearing a skirt or trousers. And they always changed seats because there weren't enough seats for everybody. There are 3 children to a desk, and there weren't enough. So the first come, first serve. So there was no seating chart. So that was a challenge. The buses that had clear labels that said 15 passengers were never full until there were at least 22 in the bus, and then it would start out. Let's see, what else? Well, anyway, those are some of the cultural things that we adapted to, actually with no problem. But one of the ones that turned out to be a real puzzle was the culturally, or the accepted practice of hitting children with sticks as a method of discipline. Either sticks, or some of the teachers carried with them a manufactured item, or they manufactured a piece of car tire, a strip of car tire, taped to a wooden handle with which they could hit the children. So this happened in schools and in homes and in the community, and it was perfectly acceptable. we were not ever supposed to change things. We were only there to serve. And however, darn it all, it was really tough to see this happen. I used to think that the teachers carried the sticks as for pointers until till one teacher left his behind when I came into the room for my lesson, and I handed them out to him, and the kids all thought it was a riot that I discovered his beating sticks. They call it beating. It was not beating the children up, but it was hard. So Andy and I really struggled with this issue, and we finally said, you know, maybe we have to do something. Maybe we just can't condone or ignore this, even though it wasn't our job to do something. So Andy had 5 different preaching points that she went to, a different one each week. And one week we were riding our bicycles down the cruddy old dirt road to a preaching point in Sequinje, and it was about 6 or 7 miles from home. And first we heard a little girl screaming, and then we came upon a man, I don't know whether it was a father or an uncle or a grandfather, holding her by her arm and hitting her and hitting her and hitting her and hitting her with a stick. And the little girl was about 11 or 12, and she was screaming her heads off. We didn't even talk about it. We stopped, we threw our bikes to the ground, we ran over to them, and of course they were shocked. So they stopped immediately. Well, the little girl was screaming, the man was, we were saying, what are you doing, what are you doing? And Andy was saying, don't do that, and I was saying, it doesn't anything. And the grandfather was saying, but she's naughty, she's been bad, she's been a naughty girl. So there were all 4 of us just kind of hollering at each other, and holy cow, it was something. And then after a few minutes, then Andy just said, let's pray. And everybody took a breath, and she put out her hands, and all 4 of us held hands, and Andy prayed. I don't even really know what words she said, but she talked sweetly and long enough about, I don't even remember what it was about. I guess that doesn't matter, does it, now? And afterwards, we talked to the grandfather about teaching the little girl with love rather than with hitting, and talked to the little girl about trying to do the right thing. And that was, and then we left and went off to church. We, after that, dared to intervene at school and even at a couple of homes where our neighbors, if we could hear the children screaming sometimes when they were being smacked around. And we were there for 2.5 years. So the hitting in school pretty much ended while we were there. And we have no idea if we've made a difference, but we tried.
I think there's any doubt that you made a difference. Of course you did. Before Andy comes up, we're going to have Chris. I've got your name here, Chris. And Chris Stanley, who has a wonderful title that I want to share with you before she comes up. Hot Pipes, Machine Guns, and a Father's Love. Come on. The gun theme going tonight.
Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, I speak very low. This is the first time I've done this in this setting. And so when I was asked to do a story about adventure, I couldn't think of any adventure that didn't involve my dad, because my dad was the epitome of adventure. Not only that, but he is actually the only person I know that could make death an adventure. But so far I'm getting ahead of myself. My dad was a fine blend of Johnny Cash, Elvis Presley, and the Bee Gees, all poured into one really nice pair of Italian shoes.
You know, he would sit on the back deck and he would just play his guitar and drink his Allen's coffee brandy sombreros, and he would hit on all of the neighborhood women, and they really loved it when he would sing songs like, "I got two strong arms, I can help." But really it was the song "Pretty Woman" that would make my mother go inside and all the women come over. So he would often bring me on his different deals that he'd do, whether they were legal or illegal deals. He wheeled and dealed as his business, really, his main source of income. And he would sell and buy anything that he could get his hands on, whether it was furniture or Disney movies or pot pipes, it didn't matter. It would be drugs, whatever he was interested in. As long as he could make a profit and knew he was getting the better end of the deal, he was interested. Everyone that knew him loved him, except for the cops. The cops really hated him, but everybody else, they loved him. Until he was like in his 40s. I was 19. I remember the SWAT team that came into our house in Portland, this whole group of men in all black, and they had their guns. It was the first time that my family actually made the evening news for illegal activity. How many people in this room can say that your parents got busted for trafficking in stolen Disney movies? Right? So that night when their mugshots came up on the screen on the evening news, my dad came up and he was very repentant. Right after that, you saw why, because it was my mother with a face of full fury. And you know that every cop in that station was glad that they were not him that night. When they came home, I blasted the song Jailhouse Rock, and my dad laughed so hard. My mom totally did not think that was funny at all. Well, that there was the end of their romance, and the end of his trips to Canada into his dream house that was in Newfoundland.
Let's switch here. Yeah, take the yellow one.
The other one?
Yeah, I'll, want to have it in the stand?
Yeah, please. Thank you. Thank you. Like that. Cool, thank you. When I was young, he used to go to Canada as a fisherman. He had gotten a job with a Swedish guy who was a really twisted businessman, but he ended up fishing in Newfoundland for a while, and it was the best gift to him because when he went there, he could be whoever he wanted to be. He no longer had to be this felon or a person with a record that followed him everywhere. He could be just who he was, this creative, beautiful spirit that loved people, and everybody knew him lovingly as Butchie. Just after a few years after he got busted, he got really sick, and he ended up landing in the nursing home with half of an amputated foot because of this diabetes that was getting to him. It seemed that everything kind of hit at once, and even though at the time, the only way he could make ends meet was to sell pot pipes at the local flea market, I stepped in and helped, even though I was studying to become a Jehovah's Witness. And the part that comes in about the machine guns is simply because in that same time frame, he had given me an oak dresser, and I took this oak dresser, was driving around with it in my car for a couple weeks, and then when I got it out of my car, I realized that in this dresser was a homemade machine gun. And so I called him and said, "Dad, you know, I'm studying to be a nurse. What about this gun?" He said, "Oh, sorry about that. Can you bring it back?" No, yeah, probably not going to happen. I'm pretty sure that's buried somewhere. But believe it or not, my dad was actually a Christian. See, back when he was a kid, he had been baptized when he was in prison. He just never believed that that love of God applied to him. But as he got sicker and he spent more time alone, he became more repentant. And actually, his actions of being so forgiving and loving towards people who had been so incredibly cruel to him in his life taught me about what it was to have the love of Jesus. And it was because of that that I joined the service at the age of 29, and I decided to pursue ministry. You know, within the year that he died, I was reminded of a quote of Peter Pan. Peter Pan says that death would be an awfully big adventure. And you might think to yourself, well, how can death be an adventure? Oh, well, it can be. When my dad died, he wanted his ashes to go to Newfoundland, where he knew that he could be who he wanted to be. But I had asked him, "Do you mind if I take some of your ashes and keep them with me?" And flattered, he said, "Yes, but don't you dare give any of them to your sister." Now that seems maybe a little contrite. Why wouldn't you give your ashes to your other child? But you'd have to know my sister, right? It's family. Family is what it is. When my dad had died, the first thing, I won't say her name, but the first thing she did was go through all of his drawers looking for money and for the drugs that he might have. The day of the funeral, when we went to get him cremated, she chased after the hearse and threw herself down on the casket and started wailing while her daughter was in the car. But the final straw was when she threatened to beat up my mother and punch her in the face. when we were moving his stuff out of his apartment. So I decided, you know what, Dad, you're right. I'm probably not going to give her your ashes. And I did what any good daughter of Butch Stanley would do. I decided that I would make her some. That's right. That's right. And how do you make human ashes? Well, first of all, you get somebody just as twisted as you are. You get yourself some grout, you get yourself a little bit of dust and rocks and gravel. A 12-pack doesn't hurt. And then you sit down and you think about this. And you make those ashes. And that's just what we did. Now, I didn't tell you the whole portion of when I went to get my dad's ashes, but when I had gone to get his ashes that night from the funeral home, I had really talked to the person at the funeral home and apologized for my family's behavior. And he was so accepting of what had happened, and he just handed me this 30-pound bag of ashes. Did you know that's how much is really there? It's not that cute little box they give you, but it's a lot more than that. And even though I decided I wouldn't let anybody interfere with my dad's peace and his resting and his death, I did touch those ashes. I wanted to feel what was going on inside of him. And it sounds a little bit weird, but I tasted them. I put them in my mouth. I wanted them to be a part of me. I wanted to experience my father from the other end. And that actually became really important in that process of making ashes, right? Because I needed to make sure they were the same consistency. So when I presented those ashes to my sister, who's the biggest con artist who's ever lived, she's really good at it. It's a good thing, I guess, if that's what you want to be. She looked at them and she sniffed them. She did everything, and I was so nervous because I do not do this kind of thing. But they passed the test. They passed the test, and I got by. Until just a couple weeks later, she came by and she said, "Hey, you know, Chris, I want you to see my new tattoo." And I said, "Oh, really? Beautiful tattoo?" She said, "Yeah, it's got ink and it's Dad's ashes in the tattoo." And I thought to myself the same thing she must have thought when she had had that hookup and realized it was our cousin the morning after. Uh-oh. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe she could get sick from this. But isn't it really what she thinks about those ashes that's going to count and last in the meantime? That summer I ended up taking my dad and a couple of friends to Newfoundland, where he wanted to be, the land where he never had to grow up and he could be wherever he wanted to be, to rest in Newfoundland. And even though he had asked me to take him down into the ocean, when I got there that night and was spending time with friends, I had a better idea. There was this waterfall that went down into the ocean that he had taken me to, the very first place that he had taken me to. So at about midnight, I went out, it was super cold out, and I took 2 great big fistfuls of his ashes, and I swam out into this waterfall, and I let the ashes go. And as I did, the water pounded down, and they all came back up like a bunch of sparkles in the water. It's as if he was saying goodbye, but it was like life. It was a spark, and then darkness, and the adventure was over.
Thank you, Chris. March 6th. March 6th. Ash Wednesday is March 6th. Yeah. If you forgot your palms from last year. That's a beautiful story, thank you. And Andy is going to talk to us about being blind and doctorless, right?
Well, not me, but yes. That's the one that doesn't work. Yeah. No, it doesn't. Didn't then, but I got it now. I'm the other one who went on that trip to Zimbabwe for 2.5 years. And I was after I was there for about 3 months, I was asked to become a pastor of a church in Zimbabwe. I didn't know enough Shona, certainly, to do any preaching, but there are always people who are happy to translate the sermons, and everything else just went on fine. One of the important things to know about church in Zimbabwe is that there are big churches And then there are all the village-based churches that are related to it. They're called preaching points. So I became the pastor of what was the second largest church in Zimbabwe, UCCZ, United Church of Christ in Zimbabwe, because I had 6 preaching points. First Sunday of the month, we all had a big service together with people coming in, walking for 2 hours from villages. And the other times, I would go to the villages, one after another, and just on a schedule, and visit their churches. So I made the tour in a month's or 2 months' time of a lot of different churches and a lot of different villages. I went down to one of the areas that didn't actually have a church, but I had been asked to go down and meet a man that had said that he had some trouble with his eyes. And so I went down to meet him, and when I say down, we were going to a village called Zika, and that is the Shona word for down. And it was this kind of down. You had to go down over rocks, and down to shelves, and back and forth, and then back up again. It was a long, long walk, and it wasn't an easy one. But I would go down there regularly, and I got the word that a man by the name of Farai wanted to see me because he was having trouble with his eyes. He was having difficulty. He was afraid he was going blind. And there was somebody else in the village, but this involves Farai. I went down there, and I talked to Farai, and he said yes, he had difficulty with his eyes. He had started having trouble with his eyes some time before, and it seemed to be getting worse. And he was wondering whether there was any way that I could help him get some medical help. This was one of the hardest things between money and distance and transportation for people to get, was good medical help. So I said I would do the best I can, and he said, by the way, before you go, my mother has also some trouble with her eyes. She has been blind for 4 years, and so I'm really very worried now that this is what's wrong with my eyes. And I said, all right, I'll see if I can get both of you to the doctor. We'll arrange some kind of transportation for you to see what we can find out about your eyesight. And so I went down one day, and I saw Farai, and we talked to him, and he said, let me take you to my mother. And we went into a mud hut and kind of crawled in, and it was dark as pitch in there, except right by the door when the light came in. And here were all the women sitting around in the light that was coming in the door, and they were working on shelling something, I think, sorting something, but they were working on their chores for the day, except for one woman. Everybody was sitting in a group over in the light, as I said, from the doorway, and here was somebody with her back to the door. I thought looking at a wall, but she wasn't looking at anything. She was blind. This was Mbuya Farai, who was grandmother of Farai. Actually, she was Farai's mother and grandmother of his children. And so she was known as Mbuya Farai. Mbuya Farai obviously was completely blind. So yes, I saw her. I would get them both to the doctor. That meant that I had to get an appointment for her, find a doctor who would see her, find bus transportation to a hospital or to some place where she could be and he could be examined. And the other thing was getting them up out of this place that you could only get by this long, difficult climbing. And certainly Mbuya Farai was not going to do that climbing herself. But we got it arranged, and people carried her up over these rocky trails, got her up to where we could get some transportation to a bus, got her to a hospital. And her eyes were examined, and his eyes were examined. First was Farai. The man always came first. And so Farai's examination turned out his problem was from an infection that he had gotten a number of years before in his eyes, and he had no way of getting it treated. And so the infection had done its damage, and the damage was continuing on its own. So there was no way of saving his eyesight, although he was not blinded immediately, but there was not much of anything that could be done. So then what about Mbuya Farai? Mbuya Farai had always had her eyes closed, and she had gone into the doctor's office and sat down where she was supposed to when she was sitting down, and the doctor was standing right in front of me, and Mbuya was over here, and the doctor said, "Can you open your eyes for me?" And she opened her eyes. I looked at her and I thought, I know what's wrong with her. She has cataracts. And so sure enough, we got her into the hospital, made 2 appointments for her, one for each eye, separate one for each eye. And the first time, she could begin to see with one eye. And when she came home from her second operation, by that time the first eye she was seeing clearly, the second eye was clearing up. On the way home, she called and she said, "Mbuya Farai, I am here. I can see outside the window of the bus. I can see in the front of the bus, the people on the bus with me. I can see the hand in front of my face. I can see." Oh my, we were excited. And she was obviously excited. But we didn't know what real excitement was until I saw her 2 times when I didn't go to see her. One time was when she came to church, when I was at the nearest preaching point to where she lived, and it was in a small dark classroom. It was full of people. I couldn't see all there was there, but at the end of the service, somebody stood up from the back where I hadn't been able to see people anyway, and she started dancing again, and singing, and clapping, and all of this, and this was Mbuya Farai, come to say thank you. And the time that it really touched us was when she came to the house. At 5:30 in the morning, she had walked all the way up the hill by herself, now that she could see, and come up again to sing and dance her thank yous. It was a wonderful experience, and it cleared some of my sight too.
Story today. We have one last tale, a whale of a tale. We have a story tonight, the glory of the story. We have the feller who is the teller of the story. The one, the only, Mark Doty. Who has had almost no time to prepare for it. But I am confident. After this, we're going to call all our storytellers up. We're going to decide who our winner is.
How does this work?
This slides in.
The rubber bottle is still down here.
Oh.
Good, thanks. This is called Don't Leave Home Without It. My son Justin is 40 years old, but when he graduated from 4th grade, I said, wouldn't it be fun, Justin, for us to go to Austin together on the train and go to see Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which had just come out, and walk down the drag by the University of Texas, see the fireworks on the lake, and then come home by bus. I had been pastoring in Austin, and then was pastoring a United Methodist Church in San Antonio, So we set out, and we had a marvelous time. Going on the train, had lunch at the Driscoll Hotel where LBJ used to hang out, and had French onion soup, which was really a treat. We did the drag walk by UT and all the rest, and as we were taking a cab to the fireworks, I looked over where the bus station had been for 1,000 years and said, "Where's the bus station?" to the cab driver. "Oh, they tore that down and it's across town." And I could just feel in my gut that that was going to be a big problem because I had planned my money so carefully. I had an American Express credit card and just enough cash, and I hadn't planned on an extra cab ride. So when we got downtown, I said, "Justin, I think I have an idea. I have a friend who has a gas station in downtown San Antonio, and I think he will loan me some money." And the gas station was right here. Where is it? Oh, they tore it down last year. So we went and looked at the fireworks, and I'm very distracted, and we have to catch a bus at 10 o'clock to go back to San Antonio. I said about 8:30, "I think we need to go now. I just have this feeling that we need to do that." And so we grabbed a cab, and I said to the cab driver, "We need to go to the bus station." He said, "This is my first day on the job." He said, "I'm sorry about that." He said, "I'm just sort of trying to find my way around." I said, "Well, okay." So we set out. Well, he got very lost and missed the turn 3 times, and the fare just kept going up and up and up. And so I said, "Okay, when we get to the bus station, please stay here, because I want to be sure they'll take an American Express card." And so they said, "Oh, no, we don't. It's strictly cash." And I said, "I have enough money to pay for the cab or the tickets, but not both." So I got back in the cab, and I said to the driver, "Would you be willing to loan us the money for the tickets?" And I think it was because it was his first day, he didn't know better, and he said, "Well, I guess I could do that." I said, "Oh my God." I said, "I literally have no other idea of what I can do." So he gave us the cash, and so I got the tickets, and so we waited, and at 10 o'clock, the bus pulled in. 100 people were waiting for that bus, and immediately filled it up. Justin and I are standing there with the other crowd. They sent another bus at midnight, 12 midnight. Justin is sound asleep. I'm holding him. We get on the bus, and we have to stand in the aisle. I thought, a 2-hour ride with me holding him all the way to San Antonio, that is going to be horrible. This young Hispanic man in the very last seat said, "Sir, would you and your boy like to sit in this seat?" I said, "Oh, you have no idea. You were an angel sent by God." And of course, we had our Anglo cab driver, our Hispanic man who gave us the seat, and so just saved our lives. So then we get into San Antonio at 2 o'clock in the morning, catch another cab. We set out for home, and the cab runs out of gas. And I thought, this isn't possible. This is just unbelievable. So this African-American guy comes running up to us and says, "How can I help you? How can I help you?" I said, "We have no gas." So the cab driver got some gas. He said, "I have a glass instrument in my car that we can use for a funnel." I said, "Really?" Unbelievable. So he used that, and the gas ran all over his hands. He got totally messed up in the process. We got home. I ran in, got more money, gave it to the cab driver. The next day, that original cab driver called me from Austin and said, "My cab is in hock. They won't let me drive it until you wire me the money for the fare that I loaned you." I said, "It's done." So I did that, and with my little United Nations group that helped me out, talk about defying all expectations, I just thought to myself, don't leave home without it.
Thank you for that. There's a certain common theme going on here. here tonight. So would all the storytellers come on up front? Come on up. We're going to make a line right up here, just like a beauty contest. So what we're going to do now is I'm just going to stand behind. I'm going to put my hands over the heads of the various storytellers, and you're going to applaud. And the louder the... And Mr. Pickles Jubilee. And our friend with the ashes. And blind at the... Story about we got to keep these little guys alive. The very first storyteller for the night. Happy story about the man's vision. And Reverend Dorhauer's story about riding around in Arizona instead of Maine. Chris, come on over. It's right down to our two here. So, let me get out of your way. So this is really important because I got to feed beside each of these two. So let's start with Chris.
You must have a story for that sweatshirt.
This has something on it. There it is. 3 Great Love sweatshirts. Okay. Now, for you, we have a very special prize. I'm going to show you all what it is, but you're not going to say a word, because we're going to make sounds that will tell her what the prize is. Okay? So. Okay? Right? Don't say anything. Don't say anything. Okay. And the notes that we start with are going to be dead, dead. Are everybody with me? 1, 2, 3. Dun, 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 dun. Words this time. Ready, a Maine adventure. Thanks to all the storytellers. Tonight, you can tell all the stories you want. Claim them as your own. Thank you, everybody. Good night. I don't know what the score is, but I bet the Red Sox are winning. Thank you.
You have one stove. Okay.
I'm not one yet. Thank you.